Academica Media. Welcome to Teach the Way They Learn, expert insight on educating all students. And now your host, Liliana Salazar.
Welcome to all our listeners to Teach the Way They Learn by Academica Media. My name is Liliana Salazar, and I am so happy to be the host of this amazing weekly podcast. The mission of this podcast is to discuss teaching strategies and how they can be the most effective in reaching all groups of students. This podcast will challenge you to put aside tradition and comfort levels and encourage you to embrace different techniques that might be more beneficial for all students. There will be times where it will only be me, and there will be times when I will have phenomenal participants to share their experiences in improving academic outcomes for all students. And this month is one of those times. I am so happy and honored to have my dear friend, Mr. Jason Doughty, with me today. Jason grew up in the suburb of Toronto, Ontario. From a childhood filled with hockey, golf, and jazz music, Mr. Jason pursued his education in the States. With college degrees in speech communication, Bible and theology, and Greek, along with a Master's of Divinity degree, Jason's calling has always been to teach, strengthen, and encourage children and their families. While living and working as a pastor in Phoenix, Jason began hearing about this new and innovative classical school called Great Hearts. When they opened up to the elementary grades, he and his wife sent their two older boys. The following year, Jason's wife began as an apprentice teacher with the newest Great Hearts school opening in Phoenix, and Jason himself followed as a third grade teacher the following year. The whole family moved to San Antonio on July 4th, 2014, to be a part of the team opening Great Hearts' first venture into Texas, Great Hearts Monte Vista. The following year, he was again a part of the new school opening, serving the last 3 years as the assistant headmaster of operations for San Antonio's second school, Great Hearts Northern Oaks. During his free time, he enjoys reading the great books, cooking, hiking, camping, running, but slowly, to be very clear, and spending with his time with his wife and children. So I am so happy to have Mr. Jason Doughty with us today. And Jason, it would be Reverend, right? Am I off, or should it be Reverend?
No, not Reverend. I served as a pastor, but I was not. I was never ordained.
Okay.
So
all right.
Yep.
So it's going to be Mr. Jason Doughty, my good friend. And so, our listeners, as you can imagine, you heard classical education a lot. So that is what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about what the heck is this classical education? Because I don't know about you, Jason, but I definitely hear a lot about this. I'm very involved with it now with you. As a result of you, I've learned so much more about classical education and about Great Hearts. And so, I decided I was talking with Ross. And Ross, say hi to the listeners. Ross is on, guys. Is Ross connected? Maybe Ross is not connected.
I'm here. Sorry, I was having trouble unmuting myself. Hey everyone.
Yes.
Pleasure
Ross
to be back.
Yes, Ross is back. And so I've been mentioning to Ross that I'm reading a lot about, this whole push in the nation regarding families looking for classical education. In fact, I just read an article by Natalie Wexer, okay, and she wrote for Forbes. Can classical education help parents find the schools they want? And this is from Forbes, and basically talking a little bit about what is it that is attracting so many families to classical education. And then on top of that, the need of finding schools that are actually have that classical education curriculum and are actually classical schools, because I was also reading that there are a lot of schools that are supposedly classical, but truly not. So today we're going to dive into that. We're going to dive into what is classical education and what is it about it that parents love it so much that there's such a need for it. And we'll start with that. So Jason, I give you the floor. You have, you can welcome our listeners. And then after that, we can just start talking about what classical education is.
Well, it's an honor to be on the podcast. And Lily, thank you for the invitation. Ross, look forward to meeting you in person at some point. It's funny, the demand for classical education is pretty significant. But there's also the challenge, which I'm sure you've engaged with a little bit in your research, is when you start looking up or Googling, what is classical education? I always like telling the joke that you go to a classical education conference, you engage with 10 different people, you ask them the question, what is classical education? And you'll get 12 answers.
That
There's a
did
lot
happen.
of different.
That did
Yeah.
happen. There are a lot. That's why I asked you, what is actually like, are they actually doing classical education? Because I did see that. You're right.
Yep, you'll see people talk very, very definitively about Sister Miriam Joseph, about grammar, logic, rhetoric, about they'll start name dropping Aristotle, Plato, Socrates, and it can be this mixing bowl of all sorts of things that hopefully, if you get enough stuff in there, that something will come out. And my wife and I heard about this. We were homeschooling at the time. And like a lot of parents, not happy with the level of education that was available at the public schools in the area in which we lived, a common thread around the nation. And we were curious when friends of ours in our homeschooling community, a very tight homeschooling community, a very good homeschooling community, with some many great and wonderful people who were capable of teaching upper algebra and calculus and all of those classes that terrify homeschool. What are we going to do when? And all of a sudden, one of our dearest friends went to the dark side, Lily.
Okay.
We found out that they were going to a public school. I mean, can you believe it? And so I, with great love, I leaned in. And their family name is the Connors, Clay and Charity Connor. And I talked to Clay. I said, Clay, you've gone to the dark side. What have you done? And he says, Jason, you don't understand. This is a different kind of a school. And what he described to me was a school that was very, very similar to the kind of school that I had already been arguing for as a pastor of children's discipleship at the church I was serving at. So really, the funny narrative for me in this began prior to even hearing about classical education in Great Hearts. I would have parents come to me and they would schedule some time and we'd meet. They would have little ones, 3 and 4 year olds maybe, or maybe they're in, and they would say, Pastor Jason, where should we be sending our kids to school? Now, appreciate the parents who were asking this had the means and the ability to do public or to do private. Right. And in the church world that I lived in, there was a lot of people who would say, well, you got to keep your kids in public school because they're evangelizing and they're doing all this great work. And then there are those who say, no, it's a wasteland and they're being indoctrinated. So keep them out as much as possible. And I had my own experience in private schools, Christian schools. It was a good school, but it wasn't great. And also there was a lot of challenges that were associated with it. And I would talk with parents that said, look, teaching is a high calling. Teaching well is a gift. And a private school, a private Christian school, is going to ask people to teach English, math, sciences, history well, but then also be able to handle the good book really, really well. And as a pastor who's focused on discipleship, I said, I don't trust a large amount of people to handle, to handle the Bible well when it comes to teaching your children. For you as parents, I think it's more important for you. I think it's important for the church community. But outside of that, as a dad myself, I'm not looking for other people to influence my children when it comes to God's word. I'm the primary influencer as a parent. The church is a primary influencer as a community. And so, Lily, listen to this. You'll laugh at this. I said, what you really want is you want a school that is going to uphold your beliefs, that is going to have strong culture of human formation and forming them well. And honestly, ideally, if you could find a school that did that without having the Bible in it, and I'm not against obviously teaching the Bible. I have books all around on teaching the Bible. You have to do it well, because you're not just teaching Dostoevsky. You're not just teaching Plato. You're not just teaching Charlotte's Web. You're teaching about someone. It's their
Yeah.
letter that you're teaching. So
Mhm.
careful, right? And so Clay described to me this school, academically rigorous, but he said, Jason, they do this thing called Socratic education. I'm like, what is that?
Yeah.
And they said, but it's classical. Their whole purpose is the formation of the human person. I'm like, all right, Clay, I understand the words that you're saying, but you're saying them with evidently a lot more significance. So my wife and I, quite literally, one of my favorite books, we went down the rabbit hole. And it was quite a wonderful and interesting world. The things that we discovered, and then as my bio says, my wife became an apprentice teacher. They actually wanted her to be a lead teacher. She's like, no, I need to warm up. She's now one of our master teachers and a curriculum master across the network. And yeah, we jumped in wholeheartedly. I have two kids in college who graduated. One is doing a master's degree. I have two other kids that are finishing up their high school career here in Jacksonville, Florida, as we've moved here now to open up Florida. So we've been in it now for almost 15 years as a family, and it has been an amazing journey, and loved seeing families blessed over and over and over and over. So many families who have said, I didn't know what I was looking for until I found this. And then I realized it was what I was looking for my whole life.
So I want to capitalize a little bit more about that because our listeners are probably not aware even more so about what classical education is.
Yep,
And
absolutely.
I understand what you said. The education will uphold beliefs. It will be the strong formation for a human person, right? It's academically rigorous. I hear all these things and I'm like, oh my God, like this is amazing. Plus, I've been viewing, I've been viewing it, I've been living it. But to the person that's listening now, what does that look like? Because right now, when we think
Yep,
of classroom, we think of, they're teaching all of the subjects, they're working with children, those children that might be struggling, they're going to do a little differentiation of instruction and help them
100%.
out. They might go to interventions, So tell me, with our mindset of what a typical classroom looks like,
Yep.
what is different about a classical education? I know you gave me these beautiful big words and they mean a lot to me, but what does that
It's
mean to
buzzword
the person
bingo.
that's listening, right?
Yeah, it's buzzword bingo, right?
Yeah, right?
Can you fit as many multisyllabic words into a
Yes,
sentence at the same
yes,
time
yes.
without people blinking?
Yeah.
No. So
What does
from
it
a
look like
classroom
when I go into a
yep,
classroom? Like,
from a classroom teacher's perspective, one of the things that it looks like, and this is funny when I talk with veteran teachers. One thing, at least, and I'm speaking from the perspective of Great Heart Schools,
right.
is we will not have the objective written on the board.
Okay.
And that is part of the Socratic process. So I'll illustrate this with
Yes.
an image of what could potentially be a fantastic lesson. You have a bunch of second graders. They go to the zoo because every second grade or third grade class goes to the zoo in their area at some point. And then you take them into an area and you blindfold them, and then you set the students into a pen, and you say, there's a very gentle animal in here, and what I want you to do is I want you to use your sense of smell, your
Mm-hmm.
sense of touch, your
Mm-hmm.
sense of hearing,
Mm-hmm.
no licking, and then I want you to tell me what you observe and see, but not just tell me as a teacher. You're having a conversation among yourselves. Well, this animal happens to be a very gentle elephant, and so one student is up at the front, and their perspective, right? Like, this is the same analogy as the blind men with on perspective, blind men with an elephant.
Mm-hmm.
But what the difference here is as the students are engaging with the thing. In this case, the thing is an elephant. It could be a mathematical problem. It could be a historical epic. It could be a piece of literature.
Got
It
it.
could be physics, science, biology. What they are doing is observing intently. and they are naming the things that they are seeing and observing. And what the teacher is doing is utilizing this information, going from the known to the unknown, right? Building this case for what the thing really is. But where the energy is coming from is the curiosity of the student.
Got it.
And what they are doing is they are the ones who are asking questions, and the teacher is returning it back. So rather than teacher answering questions, is you'll get a lot of a student asks a question, and then the teacher will then ask a number of other questions to help them think, because so often a student actually has the information available to make the discovery, but just needs to be guided along in the process to help them. And so some people will say, wow, that sounds a lot like Montessori. And I don't profess to be an expert of Montessori, but I would say it's very much, especially in the elementary grades, it's very much a guided discovery process where there is, when I go into a classroom, I'm doing instructional coaching, I am looking at the students. The first thing I look for is at the students. What are they doing? Are they engaged? And then I look at who is doing the vast amount of work. Are the students doing more of the work, or is a teacher? And Socratic education, this questioning, and ideally at the end of the class, because good teaching always has an objective, good teaching always has goals, is you arrive at the objective at the end of the day. And so you can say, right, like, now I write this up at the end of the day. So that's one of the things that a classroom teacher would see that is very, very different. The other thing that is interesting about a classical education from a classroom perspective is, I'll recite the vision statement for Great Hearts. Great Hearts exists to cultivate the minds and hearts of our students in the pursuit of truth, goodness, and beauty. So we are not imbuing, truth, goodness, and beauty. We're not imbuing knowledge. We're not filling people up with knowledge. We're cultivating their pursuit. So at the essence of it is, I am less interested in a student's academic performance. I'm less interested in their academic success as I am in their curiosity, as I am in many of the virtues that they are going to cultivate. And here are some this is a little buzzword bingo in terms of classical education, getting a little further down the rabbit hole here. Couple things that are just for Great Hearts are non-negotiable. One is truth, goodness, and beauty. These are the transcendentals. These are the things that exist outside of reality. We reject postmodernism. We reject this idea of your truth, my truth. You may have different perspectives. I acknowledge that. But if you're going to make the claim that your perspective is true, provide the warrant for it. Otherwise, you and I are not going to be able to collectively pursue the same thing. Same with goodness, same with beauty. But then the other part is, it's the cultivation of virtue. It's a cultivation, and we have 9 core virtues. Don't ask me to repeat them all, please. But a number of them are, courage. And think of the student in class, for those teachers of you that are listening. And you have a student who is silent in class. One of the things that I love doing when I was a teacher and then as a school leader is sitting down with parents whose students aren't doing well academically, and I'll ask them, how courageous is your student? And they'll kind of look at me with a bit of wonder. They're expecting study, they're expecting homework, and I say, well, understand, if your whole son or daughter is not engaged in the class, if they are completely in a receptive mode, listening only, never raising their hand, never asking questions, they're not really demonstrating courage. They're not really risking something. And then there's the idea of friendship and citizenship, and these virtues, right? These aren't values; these are virtues. Aristotle calls it the mean between two extremes. Courage is an easy one. You have, sort of the milquetoast, right? The mild, the weak on the one side, and then the foolhardy on the other. Well, courage is somewhere in between there, and it's the mean between. It's the middle. And I want my children to act courageous. I want them to take decent risks. But that part of human development actually helps the student long term. Now, is an introverted little boy going to all of a sudden be the motor mouth of the classroom? No, by no means. But there are ways that you can help develop their courage. I used to sit. I had a little girl. Her name was Sarah Chu. Genius level, but silent as a monk on a retreat. Like, just would not utter a word. And I wanted to develop, because one, the class needed to hear from her, right? The classroom is a community. A classical classroom is a community. The class needed to hear her. The rest of the students were losing out on not hearing some of her thoughts. And so what we did is I would get her to hand me at the beginning of the day. This is third grade, by the way, some 3x5 cards with something from homework, because our kids do homework, that you thought was interesting. And she always had her homework done. And so at the beginning of class, she would hand me one. And then when we got to that class and I saw something, I said, Miss Chu, I think you thought this was interesting. Can you tell me about it? So I'm setting up the stage for her to say something, and she squeaks out a little answer. And over time, we developed this, and eventually she realized, okay, I don't have to be afraid of this. Or for her, it was more generated by fear. But there's other reasons why students aren't engaging. Sometimes you have, take for instance the motor mouth, right? It's you can talk to them about citizenship. Johnny, it's always Johnny. You're talking a lot. And what would happen if all 30 students in the classroom talked as much as you? What would that sound like, Johnny? All right, Johnny, you're a citizen of this class and we want you to participate, but I need you to be listening as much. And I would tell them, and this is something that my grandfather would tell me often, and my dad through my grandfather, is, buddy, you got 2 ears, 1 mouth. Use it in proportion, because I like to talk. You and I are the same.
We are.
And so it's this cultivating virtue, and not just looking. I am not satisfied with excellent academics. I'll finish my little rant with this story. So my son started in his first grade of regular public school, charter school, classical school, was 4th grade.
Okay. And
our family were always talking about effort over results. I don't care about your results. I care about the effort that you're putting in. And so my wife and I got his report card, and he had no idea what he hadn't learned to track his grades yet. And so I'm sitting there with the report card up like this, Lily, in front of me, facing away from him. And then I asked him, I said, curious, how do you think your first semester went? And he answered some questions. I said, are there areas that you can improve? And we listed off the subjects: math, reading, all the way down through. And he said, well, math, I could do this. And, and he lists off all of these areas that he could grow in. And then I turned around the report card. I said, great. I'm glad there's areas that you can grow in, because you can't get any higher grades. You got straight A's.
Wow.
And that has always been a powerful moment for our family. And I've repeated it with all 4 of my kids multiple times, and I don't think parents or teachers understand, excellent academics isn't the end. It's just a means. It's a way of measuring. In a lot of ways, grading is messy and it's inhumane. And we all know that deep down. We look at a student, we're like, they're going to see this B-, or they're going to see this C, and they're going to think that they are less than, and shame on education for creating that. But the conversation really needs to be about, who are you becoming? And there are opportunities for enrichment and deeper engagement and cultivating yourself as a human being in more ways than can be remunerated to you on a report card.
I 100% agree with everything that you've said, Jason. I think that, especially coming from my background, where children are labeled as a result of a disability, right? I know I'm maybe
on that one,
right? But Yeah, you have to be labeled for federal funding purposes, right? Or for state funding purposes, but does that almost become your persona, right? Does that almost become, if you're constantly hearing that and you're constantly being viewed through those lens and you're constantly being treated through that. So I absolutely resonate with the grading opinion. And going back to the virtues in my research, absolutely correct. Like that is the number one thing that is drawing families to classical
Yeah,
education. The fact that
100%.
am I wrong? Like that's what my research said, right?
No, it is. And what it is, I like the analogy of of knitting. Um,
Yes,
and anyone who knits, you get this bat of yarn, and done right and done patiently. I was impatient once, riding as a passenger in the car and helping my wife turn this bat of yarn, which is just a gigantic loop of yarn after yarn after yarn, and then turning it into a ball. Um, it's a very it's a very simple process, but it's painstaking. It takes a lot of time to do well as you're turning it, end over end over end, to turn this gigantic loop of strands into a ball.
hmm
This is what parents do with their children, is
right.
they're carefully working to wind this ball up, right, to
I
get
love
this
that
this
analogy.
nice
Yes,
bundle of threads,
yes,
right, and then they put it in the care of a school,
right,
and they pray, dear God, I pray that this ball of yarn comes back
right,
to me in somewhat the same form.
right.
Yet so often it comes back as a tangled mess,
Correct.
and then they have to spend time in the evening, and they're untangling things. Sometimes, not to get too deep, but there are knots that are unknown, right?
Right.
Like it could be look like they are fine, but the
Mm,
way that the human person and how complex the human person is that there's knots deep inside. And what parents find in classical education, in real classical schools that are interested in the formation of the human person, is that they care about the impact that their formation is having.
that is
You
absolutely
cannot not
the
teach,
same.
you
Yeah.
cannot not communicate. And if you have any responsibility for children, you are forming them, whether you appreciate it or not. And so, understanding that we are forming them, we are going to be very attentive and careful about that, and thoughtful and intentional about that. And this comes down to, and this is where sometimes actually, you get parents who kind of go, really? And it happens when there's some behavior issues, because the do you take something out at the bud stage, or do you get the excavator and dig up the yard to try to get that dandelion that just won't go away? Like, what is your technique?
Right.
And so we are more, someone's like, you're awfully nitpicky. Well, um,
Yeah.
I appreciate your perspective, but we care. We care very deeply about the way that our children are treating each other, and we want your student to cultivate the virtue of friendship with everyone at the school. And then they'll look at me like, wait a second, you're asking them to be BFFs with everybody? No, 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 no. Don't misunderstand me. You can act friendly towards everybody. You don't need to be everybody's best friend,
Correct.
but you can be polite, you can be kind, you can be gracious, right? And it's these kinds of things where parents, and it's interesting. Sometimes parents are like, I'm not sure I like this. I'm
Yeah.
like, you know what? I understand that.
Right.
Great hearts and classical education, in my mind, is the best education for every student. But there are families, because of the way that they live, because of their values and what they put preference and priority on, that the school isn't for them.
And
And
I
and I and that's okay.
Right, and that leads me to several things because you said so many important facts that I wanna highlight. Um, the first thing is that's why there's school choice in this country, right? Because
Amen.
and I always say, and every time I present, and especially when I'm providing professional development for teachers, the very first thing I do is I thank them, and I thank them for being a teacher in a charter school, but not because it's an Academica supported charter school, because charter schools offer choice to parents, and your zip code should never dictate where in this country you can send your child to. And so the
I mean,
fact that there is choice in this country is very valuable. And some parents might choose great, not just great hearts, but some parents might choose classical education because, again, as I was looking at the research, a lot of the virtues behind it, and some might not. But the fact that this country has choice is so important, right? And then
I love what a colleague of mine said. I'll just interrupt. I'll give you a phrase. There's always been school choice. There's always been school choice by strategic real estate acquisition.
Correct.
There's always been school choice.
Absolutely, right? And then the second fact that you stated when we're talking about classical education is this idea of the questioning and the teacher facilitating the thinking process. And what
Yep.
every time I do, I do a great PD with my colleague David Calvo on the science of learning. And that is actually how students learn. It's not throwing all of this information into their brain. It's not everything that's in the short-term memory. It's actually making it get to the long-term memory so that because that's when they've learned it. And every time they go back and grab long-term memory and bring it to short-term memory, that's learning. That is the process of learning. And obviously, just by being in a classical education school and going through that process of questioning, of tapping into higher order thinking, of analyzing, of constructing, of criticizing, but in an intellectual way, of disagreeing. All of that leads to learning, and that's why it's funny because I just did a tour on. I visited our classical education schools in Wyoming. Academica has supports 2 classical education schools in Wyoming, and I was shocked because I hadn't realized that they're not about technology, that the
Oh
fact
no,
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 that right? Right?
Great Arts is
And
not. Yeah,
we had
yeah.
talked about that, but it really hadn't hit me until I walked into the classroom and I saw, Lord Jesus, there's not even one computer here to many of our listeners that have children in typical charter schools or typical
Yeah, no smart
the
boards.
one thing, right? The one thing that we first ask for is there a device? Is there a computer? How
Yeah,
are we going to do, all of our
whiteboards,
instruction, right? And so
and massive amounts of expo markers.
right. That really hit me hard. And even though I had read about it, and even though you had told me about it, like when I walked in and literally sat and looked at this teacher doing this lesson, I was like, wow, this is like, where was this when my children were
Well, and
were
it's
being trained,
interesting because the back to the experience of the teachers in the classroom. I thought of 2 things. One is when we're creating our lesson plans, right? So much of the lesson planning, and you can see back here, uh,
I see
leverage
100 bucks.
leadership, right?
Yeah, yeah,
There's
yeah.
leverage
Yeah,
leadership
right
there.
there,
So
leverage leadership.
there's teach like a champion. There's a lot of things that Great Hearts
I love Doug
has
Lemont.
realized. Like excellent teaching is excellent teaching. However, in lesson planning, I really stress for my teachers, once you get all of your things organized, you have your objective and everything is leading down, you have your goals that you're wanting to achieve. My student must know this by the end, and be able to do, etc. Now you get to the part you say, all right, what questions am I going to ask that are going to help them to discover the things that they need to discover via that known to unknown process? And that is an extra step. Any teacher can do this in any kind of place, and it's extremely valuable. And then the other thing is this: you talk about technology, and this is where our love and ease with something like PowerPoint can have such a detrimental effect. Think about a conversation where let's say you've read a story about the Jungle Book, and there's some animals, and so you've done that in literature. Now you're in science, and you're studying kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species, and you're looking at one of the animals, and you say, all right, how does Rudyard Kipling describe this animal in the book, right? And then you're going to lead that into a study of elephants or wildebeest or whatever the case in the animal is, right? If you had a PowerPoint, you probably have the picture of the animal.
Correct.
And then you have all of it. You've gone through dutifully and listed off all of those things. But what if the kids don't have them come up in the same order?
Got it.
Are you going to just not do anything and then let them say different things? You're like, you know what? All of those are good ideas. And then click. He talked about this. The moment you've done that, you've now taken away the building
Yes.
responsibility
Yes.
from the student to the teacher. Go take a whiteboard and say, all right, I'm going to write this up. 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 And then you can say, look at what this has. And then we do use, my voice squeaked there. We do use PowerPoint and other things like that. But what I tell people is put it up afterwards,
Right.
and say, all right, here's some other things that y'all got this. Here's a couple other things. So then I'm adding from the PowerPoint to this.
Yeah.
Because in our schools, board equals notes. If it's on the board, it's in your page. You're making notes. So you're always writing. You're always writing. When we're reading books, if I opened up a number of these books that my wife, myself, or my kids have all read, you would see that they're all annotated. You always read with a pencil.
Yeah, because I did walk around in the Wyoming school, and I literally saw textbooks. I mean, student books, and yes, an extreme amount of note taking, an extreme amount of annotations. You're absolutely correct. Yes.
And the idea is that everyone is a humble learner. And it's funny you mentioned Wyoming. There's a classical university in Wyoming Classical University. And I was sitting in a class, and it was led by a teacher. It was a literature class, and so he's got his novel in front of him. And as I'm looking over his shoulder, I can see 6 different colors of annotations. And his book is full. And this is a collegiate level American literature class, and they are going deep. And they're engaging in a Socratic discussion, a seminar, which is another hallmark of classical education that will probably be good to mention. Not every classical school does it. They were doing it. And the student makes this very poignant remark. And the teacher, whose entire book, he's probably written more in this book than the author themselves has written in the book. That's how many notes he has. He pauses, he says, hold on a second, I need to write something. Wow. And he writes down the point. And what that demonstrates, right, is that the teacher is not, they are not there to present the information of this is all that I have known. Some academic intellectual vomit onto the desks of the students. They are there as a fellow learner, but someone who is themselves insanely curious and is still excited about what they're presenting and what they're learning, because their interest is not just conveying this knowledge. Their interest is in learning more themselves. But the best way to learn, think about a mountain. The best way to learn about a mountain is to hike it. And every single time you hike it, every single time you hike good things, good literature, and this world that God has created and made so beautiful and wonderful and ordered and knowable, guess what? You can still engage in this learning process. And it's that part where the teacher is the humble learner with authority in their classroom that makes a classroom sing. Because they're not totalitarian, they're not authoritarian. They are probably, if we all thought back, for me, it's Mrs. Graves, 3rd grade. I'm 48. I still remember, I can picture her. Thank goodness for Facebook in one sense. I'm able to say hi every now and then. And there's a couple of others, but Mrs. Graves sticks out. Mr. Anderson, my jazz teacher in high school. Mr. Slanetsky, another music teacher. But not all of them. Not all of them. There is a number who I just couldn't wait to get out of. And so that humility of the teacher to sit in a class and say, no, actually, I've never heard it said that way. That is so beautiful. Hold on a second. Let me write that down. All of a sudden, guess what? What is every student doing? Oh, I'm writing that down. Mr. Doughty thought that was good. I'm going to write it down. And here's little Johnny's like, that just like burped into my mind and I said it. but apparently it was profound. And that's the beauty of community, when we're engaged in collectively engaging in gnawing on the bone of something so that we can all get at the marrow. One person can't do it on its own, but then you walk away. And I'll just touch on seminar because I think this is such a perfect segue to it. Seminar in our classical education model at Great Hearts at ninth grade and above, we don't have English and we don't have history. We have humane letters. And this is a 2-hour class which studies literature and history and ethics and philosophy, but it's done in a seminar format. And ideally, and you get this in 11th and 12th grade, is the students will have read significant portions of a text, whether that's historical, primary source, preferably at that level, or a piece of literature. And then they will come to class and the teacher will write a provocative question on the board. And then we'll sit back. And then for 2 hours, the teacher will function more like a functional mute as the students are themselves asking questions and saying, and we use very formal address at our school. So student to student, Miss Smith, you just made the point that, Dostoevsky said da, 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 da. Could you elaborate a little bit more fully on that? Because I'm not sure that I see it the same way. You have students questioning students. You have students disagreeing. Well, I appreciate your perspective on that, but I disagree. And if we turn to page 12, down to the second paragraph, Aloysia says, blah, 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 right? And so they're very rigorously reading to each other points of the text to communicate what they think is the correct answer for the provocative question on the board. By the way, the provocative answer on the board, best written, is unanswerable.
Right.
It's a deep philosophical question that drives you through, and it helps students to realize actually answering the question isn't the goal. It's what happens in the answering that is the goal, because I learned this so much. Your students don't do book reports. They write papers. And then our seniors finish with a thesis. They write a thesis. I think it's somewhere between 15 to 25 pages. They defend it in front of a forum of faculty, a real collegiate and sometimes master's level experience. And that's the classical experience for a student at Great Hearts, and it's a classical experience for the teachers who are participating in it.
I really appreciate you being here today. I have to bring you back because there's so much more that we have to unpack. Like I just kept writing notes. I'm writing notes, and I'm like, okay, but wait, I need to ask about this. I need to have
shorter sentences, Jason. Right. Shorter sentences.
Just so I can ask more questions. But we got a phenomenal introduction on it, and I think that's what I wanted my listeners to have, because again, there is this huge movement, and I just and I get a lot of families that will call me and say, Lily, what is classical education? And so I've had to do my own research, but then I connected with you, and then I've learned more. Then I've gone and observed classrooms, and so it's definitely coming together. But definitely, there's more, I guess, to unpeel, right, when it comes to classical education. But definitely that this time around, I think that we do have a better understanding of it, and now it's even more clear why families, and given what's happening and in this world, I can see how first-time families, my children are older already, but I can look at it like when I have grandchildren, I can see how families are yearning for this type of experience for their children, especially with with what's going on. So I end all of my podcasts, because I am bringing you back. So you're going to have to come back, Mr. Jason Doughty. You're going to have to come back. But I end all of my podcasts by giving everyone, my presenters, or, my guests, a quote, and what that quote feels and resonates to them. And so when I was thinking about the quote for this podcast, I thought that this is definitely very classical education. So I'm going to have Jason, in less than 1 minute, explain to me what this quote means to him, right? And so it is. Right. I'm sure you've heard it, but it's from Aristotle, and it says, educating the mind without educating the heart is no education at all. I'm going to say it one more time. Educating the mind without educating the heart is no education at all. So when we think about your very strong beliefs in classical education and you think about this quote, what words resonate with you?
There's a similar quote by Theodore Roosevelt that says, "To educate the mind without educating the heart is to create a menace to society." Intellectual fiends is the idea that I get from that. It is someone who has all the ways to understand and master the world and information, and yet no morality outside of their own self-centeredness, greed, and vice to make use of it. They do not see themselves as citizens of a community, but they solely see themselves as the reapers of society, gaining as much as they can, dominating as much as they can. And they're very smart people, right? Psychopaths measure at the top of the scale, but I don't want to be their friend and I don't want to spend time with them. I want to spend time with smart people who are interested in sharing their knowledge with me and helping me become a better person. Ultimately, that's, educating the mind and not educating the heart. You've
Right.
really done nothing at all
Not
other than
only
a
becoming a
disservice.
better person for you, Jason, but also because you're a better person, then planting that seed in this world and
Oh,
starting
100%.
classroom, your community, your classroom, your school, your community, and God willing, you graduate and you go out into this world and you become that person as well. Because if there's
Yep.
anything I feel is that, given where we're at right now in this world and in our lives and with what's happening and all of the turmoil and all of the negativity, and I'm not talking about politics, I'm just talking about just overall feeling of what's happening in this world. I
Yep.
feel that we need just a little bit, if you don't choose classical education for your child, but we need a little bit of that and those virtues in education, just period. So I very
100%.
appreciate being with you today and learning more
Likewise.
classical education. And I know my listeners are going to want more. So I'm gonna bring you back for classical education part 2, because what I'd like to discuss when I bring you back is why as a teacher I might want to go and start teaching for classical education and so
Yep.
on. So there's a lot of more things that we can unpack, but I want to thank you. Ross, is there anything that we need to say to our listeners? Anything that I might have missed?
Yes, just please be sure to tune in every month to check out the new content that we're releasing on Teach the Way They Learn. You can check out Lily's page you can check out her Instagram, you can check out her LinkedIn, you can also check us out on iHeartRadio and at Academica Media to see all the cool things happening in education.
Yes, absolutely. And Ross, thank you again. Very happy. Ross, wasn't this amazing? Isn't that classical education?
Listen, this was great. This is like a whole different approach, in my opinion, to education. Like Lily said, like we travel to a lot of the schools on a regular, basis, and it's really cool to be like on the other end,
Yes.
be not the student, but be the instructor in the classroom. And I get to see a lot of the teachers, in action, speak to a lot of the students, and I do coach on a regular basis. I coach boys volleyball, girls soccer and boys soccer. So, and I'm on top of my athletes, and I tell them, you guys are students before you're athletes. So there's a lot of cool things that you mentioned that you do with your children that I'm like, oh, you know what? I've been taking note, like the things with the grades and things like that I can, adopt and, implement with my student athletes at the schools and things like that. So it was really cool.
Well, Ross, part of it is intellectual, moral, and athletic virtues. As a whole human being, it is a detriment to society to not form the body as well and to do that well. So, yeah, there's a lot more that we can discuss about classical education. It truly is a rabbit hole.
It sure is. So, listeners, thank you for everything. Please share the podcast, especially if you have friends or families that want to learn more about classical education. But just overall, share, teach the way they learn, because we're trying to get as many listeners as we can within our podcast. And as I always end every podcast, always remember, if a child can't learn the way we teach, then maybe we should teach the way they learn. Have a wonderful week, listeners. And Jason, thank you again for everything. Ross, I love you. Thank you for always taking care of me.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Lily. Thank you, Ross.
expressed on the preceding program have been those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views of Academica, its clients, staff, affiliates, or advertisers.